Hello everyone, welcome back to the Genomics Bootcamp. This is a rather special video and I will tell you in a moment why. You see, all of us coming here are from different backgrounds and our common denominator is the interest in genomics. For me, this interest sparks from the animal breeding or use of the genomic data in the animal breeding scenarios. Now, animal breeding and production has a little bit of a special status because together with the plant breeding and production, well, it just takes care all of our food resources. And if we look at it from a wider scale, it contributes to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, namely goal number 2, no hunger. Now, you probably know that animal breeding includes a lot of genomics nowadays, but at the end is not that simple. There is a lot of things and a lot of aspects to take care about, especially if we look at things and look at animal breeding and genetics from the global perspective. This video intends to give an insight to this global perspective, especially to the challenges we face with animal breeding in low-income countries. The presentation itself is a little bit older, and it's actually a part of the welcome course for the European Master in Animal Breeding and Genetics Master course, and the summer school called Contribution of Animal Breeding to Global Food Security. But the contents are really interesting, so I re-edited it to the purposes of the Genomics Bootcamp channel. Well, the presentation doesn't contain a whole lot of genomics, but I still thought it might be interesting also for the hardcore genomics people also to see what else is out there and perhaps to widen a little bit your horizons about the challenges that are ahead of us. Of course, as always, if you have any comments or questions, I'd love to see them in the comments section below. Also, if you find the video interesting, be sure to send the link to your colleagues. But right now, without further ado, let's start and talk about animal breeding in low-income countries. In this presentation, we have 3 parts that we will be speaking about. First is animal breeding in general, and then some of the components of the breeding programs that are valid in general. Then something with the breeding systems, in particular crossbreeding systems, and then I will speak about the community-based breeding programs. So what is breeding? If we want to define it, we can say that this is a use and selection of mating strategies and various other approaches involving the population that we want to direct it to some kind of a breeding goal. The problem is, however, that we need to take decisions and we need information that is often unknown to select the candidates that are best suitable for our purposes. A simplistic breeding program can be summarized as follows. So if there is the breeding objective that we talked about, then there is a performance testing. This is to get the records, which is because the records and the phenotype testing is extremely important for any kind of a breeding program, because it is how we distinguish the good animals from the bad ones. Anyway, so when we have this performance testing, then we put everything into a computer or in some other way as we estimate the breeding values. But yeah, just a spoiler alert, this is nowadays exclusively with the computers. So we have these breeding values, and at the end we have the breeding values that we use for selection and mating. So we select for the best animals and mate them to achieve progress. Now, I told that this is a simplistic view. One is that is just linear, so it seems that it's like it has a beginning and the end. But in reality, the breeding program is really a cycle. This cycle has multiple stops and multiple kind of levels, that some of them were mentioned before, but it has more to it. So the first one is the definition of the production system that was not mentioned before, because not all the breeding programs and not all the measurements and not all the phenotypes are suitable for all production systems. Based on this, we can define the breeding goal, then collect information, as it was mentioned before. So here is a bit more detailed, that we also need not just phenotypes. So this is the phenotypes being the records for the production traits, but we also need the family relationships. So we need the pedigree information for the animals. And nowadays we often are in a business of genotyping and determining the breeding values based on the genotypes. The fourth one is determining the selection criteria. This is the models and estimate actually the breeding values. Then we going to go to the selection and mating, and then we evaluate the consequences of our breeding or mating decisions. And in the follow-up, we try to disseminate our results and the breeding program, whether it's in a pure breeding scenario or crossbreeding systems, as we will speak about later in this presentation. And then at the end, we evaluate in terms of genetic improvement, so the genetic gain, and which is also important, the genetic diversity of our population. So we want to achieve progress, but we want to achieve a progress that is sustainable, so that we do not destroy the population in 1, 2, or 3, or 10 breeding program cycles. So the sustainability of the breeding program is also of great interest. So how these breeding programs are working in the developed regions in the world. Now, developed here is in a quotation marks, because I don't like this phrase at all, but unfortunately I don't have any better one. This phrase is just wanted to highlight the countries that are just frankly better off in terms of economy and the possibilities that they can invest into their breeding programs. So in these regions, the animal breeding programs are high-tech operation with decision-making taking place in a high level of breeding organizations, and generally the environmental conditions are favorable for high yields. So environmental conditions in this case meaning not only climate, but also the housing conditions and all the production environment that is in place. But why are we concerned about the breeding at all? So the breeding is a long-term process with changes that can be made from one generation to the next, as it's already established. The interesting thing also in the breeding is that it's permanent and the effects remain in the population. Now, there is an assumption that is sometimes made that it's easier to change the environment, so it improve the feeding or provide more or better feed and better health care to the animals, that would then in return improve the production capacity of the breed or of the population more or in a more substantial way than breeding itself. I don't claim that the feeding and health management are not important for a population to be productive, but the statement that this would be more important and this is a more easy change or a more beneficial change rather than breeding is false. The environmental conditions are often more stubborn, in a sense that they are less easily changeable, and we are much better off if we invest time and resources into breeding, because this then leads to genetic changes, as it was mentioned, and these genetic changes being permanent. If we want to have a nice and reliable breeding program in place, then we need to think about several issues, and these issues are listed on this slide. So first one, we need to describe the production environment. We need to know where are we going. Then we need to set the breeding objectives. We need to see what traits we are selecting for, and then we need to do the planning and the organization of the breeding programs themselves. So for the breeding objectives, for this, we need to be aware of the production environment, and this question arises, which characteristics of the animal populations should we improve?
Now we need to define the breeding objectives, but this, in some cases, especially in populations where the breeding approaches are not so strong, these breeding objectives may be just very vaguely defined or insufficient or unrealistic, which is of course a big problem in terms of moving forward to achieve a sustainable genetic gain. In the following slides, there are a few takes or a few versions of breeding objectives I want to show you. And the first one are the conventional definitions that you might heard about. So these are for single traits. For example, we want a population of cattle to have 7,000 kilo of milk with a certain percentage of fat and protein, or we want to have some kind of a daily gain or some other thresholds. We want to reach some other thresholds, for example, in a pig population. Well, the advantage of these are that they are easy to comprehend, but they are do not considering certain key aspects of the breeding that needs to be also taken care of. Another definition of the breeding goal is more like from an economic perspective, developing vital animals which will ensure that profit is high and possible under future commercial conditions of production. So with this, you see, here is a little bit more as well to it. So not just a single number or a simple number, but we consider also costs and revenues, target towards future circumstances, for which unfortunately we don't know what the future is, of course, but we estimate it and try to figure out what the best approach is. The problem with this approach, however, is that the cultural values or the so-called intangible values are not considered at all, and there is no risk aversion in this kind of definition of the breeding goal. Now there is a third one which actually tries to mold everything together, and with the definition of a breeding goal, such as the breeding activities that are aimed to support small subsistence farmers to develop cost and resource-saving production methods to become more market-oriented in order to provide for their families and stay on the land. Animal products should be produced efficiently, taking account of specific environmental conditions with severe climatic and feed restrictions and seasonal fluctuations, as well as minimum investment opportunities. Now, obviously, this breeding objective definition is a very specific one to a small farmer conditions who are breeding basically to sustain their families. And they also live in an environment that is generally challenging for multiple aspects, as mentioned in the definition of the breeding goal. So by no means this is for example, for Holstein cattle in any European country. This was just to highlight that there is more to the breeding objectives or definition of the breeding objectives than just stating a simple number as it was just 2 slides back. So I hope you see the difference between the definitions of saying I want my cattle to produce 4,500 kilos of milk, and this kind of definition that takes everything or more circumstances into account. So just to have a few bullet points on this as well, in terms of analysis, here the efficiency is the central goal. The restrictions and season fluctuations are taken into account. There is a risk aversion aspect to the breeding goal, and the whole thing is more really than a breeding objective, but this is an objective for a breeding program. One of the aspects that was mentioned was the risk aversion that comes up repeatedly, especially when it comes to breeding programs in low-income countries, where we have small animals, multi-purpose animals, and we want them to be resistant to diseases that are appearing in those countries. So the traits that we are interested in for the breeding programs have to have certain characteristics, and these are listed here. So they should represent the breeding goal. We should be able to measure them relatively easily. There should be, of course, heritable from parents to offspring, because of course we want to achieve genetic change. We do not want to have too many traits, because if we need to measure and take into consideration 25 traits that are all of them are somehow related to each other, we can be soon lost in the details. And of course, this is also has a connection to a next point, that we want to avoid traits that are in antagonistic relationships between each other, which means that basically they are negatively correlated, meaning that if we increase one trait, the other trait decreases. This is not something that we want to happen. The next step in planning and organization of breeding programs are listed in this slide. So there are the first one is the choice of species and breeds. Then there is a breed evaluation, and we need to characterize the breed. Then decide which breeding methods we want to use for which breeding systems, if there are any biotechnical approaches that we want to capitalize on, and what infrastructure that we have in place so the whole breeding program could be sustainable for a longer term. Now, for each of these points, there are some more details coming. And the first one is on the choice of species and breeds. There are several characteristics for the breeds that we need to take into account if we want to establish a breeding program for them. So what feeding resources are available and what feeding resources they require. If our breed of choice is susceptible for any disease or some parasites that are in the region where we want to implement this breeding program. Also, what infrastructure this breed requires, and if this is in place. What I mean by infrastructure is, for example, if we have a breed that requires a specific, for example, specific housing conditions, and if these housing conditions are not in place or cannot be established, of course, then this is a problem, and we need to look for another species or another breed that fulfills our need. The next point is on the economics, so basically money. Yes, so we need to be sure that the breed has economic potential and can fulfill our needs for the products, but also that these products are marketable when it comes to getting revenues from the breeding program, or basically from the animals or animal products. The next point, which is often looked at and considered, if the breeds for which we're developing the breeding program has some cultural or some other kind of value that makes it interesting to set up a breeding program and to keep it in this particular environment. In a best case scenario, so there are also some national frameworks already set up, because, well, we have to remember that we are not dealing with the breeding programs as private people, but it's usually on the level of a region, or sometimes or quite often at the level of the whole country, which has its own systems in place. And hopefully there is also, well, the leaders of the country or the region already were thinking already about the breeding programs and animal breeding in advance. So they might be some development programs or livestock development programs in place. And if our breed of choice is also kind of a priority in these national livestock development programs, then we are much better off and we have much better opportunities to establish a successful breeding program for these breeds. Next, for the breeding program, we need to think about our breeding methods. So what we want to do, we can go for a crossbreeding or pure breeding strategy, of course, again, depending on if our goal is just straight producing, well, a lot of animal-based products, or we need to produce and keep a breed in a purebred form at the same time. So we have different possibilities here. So the breed substitution is meaning that we have a breed in place, but this is not suitable at all. So we will bring in a new breed that we want to improve. So this new breed could be from the same country or the region. So it's in fact a native breed, or we can bring in some exotic breed to the country. Now, I want to pause here for a moment and just to take some time on the term exotic breed, just also because from my perspective, and yeah, when I first came in contact with these breeding programs and heard the term exotic breed, for me it was always the exotic breed was something from Africa or from Asia or from somewhere outside Europe. Now, this is of course exotic for me, but it's not exotic breed if we come to Asia or Africa where this breed is in fact native. So we look at the breeds when it comes to exotic and native from the perspective of the country or from the region where the breeding program is being implemented. So if we are implementing a breeding program in Africa, for example, or in a certain country, then, for example, a Holstein cattle is an exotic breed because it's coming from outside of the country and it is in fact a non-native in that environment. And now what we can do, of course, and if we decide that the local breed or native breed is not good enough, we can bring in this exotic breed, which is supposedly much better in terms of genetic background and all the other characteristics. Of course, what we can also might find out that we bring in 200 Holstein cattle, and by the end of the first year, 190 are dead because of the climatic conditions and the parasitic load, which is then, well, might not have been such a good idea. Because of this, we also might consider, and this is oftentimes done, to do a selective breeding or basically an improvement of the local breeds. So we can do a selection among native types or native breeds and local breeds, but also what we can do is bring in exotic cattle or exotic breeds and try to do a breeding program and improve their capabilities to adapt to the local environments. Or what we can also go for is a combination of these two approaches, which is of course the crossbreeding. So we can take the native breed and the exotic breed and start to do crossbreeding programs, and we have crossbreds of various level, and we can try to find out what is the best scenario for our purpose. A very advanced level of the crossbreeding is the creation of the synthetic breeds, which is in fact a very advanced crossbreeding program when there is an advanced planning what is the final product that is desired, from which breeds these final products consist of, and we want to get into a situation that we have sufficient number of animals with these levels of various breeds that they can be mated to each other, in fact establishing a new population and a new breed. So the next point we need to take into consideration the breed evaluation, and we need to compare the breeds at the level of life cycle efficiency under the conditions where they are at or where they are producing. Because if we take, for example, an exotic breed, or let's say more generally the Holstein cattle, it is clear that it is very efficient, for example, in European conditions. But what we need to ensure also that it will be efficient also in the conditions that prevail in the area that we want to implement our breeding program. So we need to look at this life cycle efficiency that is, again, not just a production issue. Of course, it is also has a production aspect. I would argue that it's one of the most important aspects because, of course, we are keeping the animals for their products. So we need to assess that. In addition, there might be additional circumstances or additional production aspects that we are, for example, not really interested in, let's say, European conditions, but they might be relevant for or in a condition of a low-income country. The example of this is, for example, drought power, so that it could be used in plowing, for example, something like that. Another aspect, of course, what we want to have for our animals, that they have a good reproduction, and of course that they survive, that they go on with the cycles of their lives. For example, when it comes again, well, I just default back to cattle, that they provide a calf approximately each year for a long time, and that in the lactation or the upcoming lactation, they produce a sufficient amount of milk. So in this definition, having a calf every year, which is a reproduction part for a long time, is survival, and then providing a sufficient amount of milk is the production aspect. So all these have to be in a good shape so we can be confident that the breed that we have chosen is a good one. Now there is a bit of a problem with the conditions or the conditions of the environment, because the measurement of these conditions or the assessment in general is quite difficult. Well, we could do a so-called field test. Which is a real conditions in the farms, but this can be done only if, for example, well, basically distributing animals along a number of farmers and then try to follow these animals up and measure all kinds of variables and see how they are affecting the animals, which is a big organizational burden and a big financial burden, and the outcome is not ensured. So it's not ensured that we would have an outcome that is extremely useful for long term. Now, what is being done many times is this, so that to send these animals to the geographical region where the production environment is, but not to real farms. In a quotation marks, real farms, but into stations, oftentimes government stations, that serve as a place where the animals can be assessed, well, in the climate, at least in the climatic conditions that they will be producing on later. Now, this one also has a bit of a problem, because also the management conditions in these experimental stations are not the same as in farm conditions. So it can be that the animals or the crosses or any type of breed that is assessed in an experimental station has quite good results in the experimental stations. For example, high-level crosses with the exotic breeds or the exotic breeds themselves, but when they come to the actual farms or actual real production, they are not so good anymore. So this is also something that we struggle with, and actually this will be also taken up later in this presentation when we come to some other approaches that could be used for breeding. The next point is the biotechnical approaches that were mentioned before. So just a few details on these. So first one is the artificial insemination, which I would argue is the backbone of the breeding globally. So this approach is about increasing the possibilities of the top male animals to have offspring, so they can have much more offspring than, or when we compare this one to a natural mating. In terms of females, so there could be various interventions like ester synchronization is one, or there is then, which is connected to it, the embryo transfer, meaning that also, well, we enable the top female animals to have much more offspring that they could have with natural mating. With the artificial insemination, as I mentioned, is widely available globally and also in developing countries or low-income countries with relatively experienced staff and also providers for this for the artificial insemination doses. Of course, for this whole system to be in place, there is a need for an infrastructure that is sustained, and in this case, the most important stuff is the liquid nitrogen that is used for the conservation of the semen or the freezing of the semen, well, the semen itself, from the bulls or from the male animals that the people care about. And this semen needs to be transported in the liquid nitrogen tanks to the place or to the farm where a trained person should basically inseminate the female animals. Now, the technology is available, but the problem is that due to the, well, various reasons related to infrastructure, mostly, this technology has proven unsustainable. So it is actually working very well when everything is working smoothly, but if you kind of introduce some kind of a disturbing elements or some parts are not available, are not working very well, then the whole system basically just crashes. Another important part of the breeding programs, as I mentioned before, is the data recording. So this is actually, again, something that is extremely necessary to have a breeding program and to have possibilities to improve our animals or our population, because what we need really is to assess which animals are better than the others. And of course, based on these production data and these production records, we want to select the animals that are the better ones and then make them as the parents of the next generation. So we need recording, and we also need to process these data so they are in a good enough shape to work with them further. This needs also a certain organization framework, so we need to animal recording on the field, but then with the recording centers, if there is AI centers or dairy corporations that deal with the records themselves. If we leave this to individuals, then of course we might face a situation that the delivery of the records is not continuous and there are some gaps in the recording, which is of course then a problem in terms of assessing the breeding program itself. Now, another crucial point to the recording is that all the animals need to be identified with a unique identifier, which is also a challenge because, well, we are not talking about a herd level, which we have, I don't know, 5, 10, 50, 100 animals, but we are talking about a level of the population on multiple farms, maybe in multiple regions, on a whole country level, and we need to take care each animal that is relevant for the breeding program is identified with the number, and this number is not being used anywhere else in the country. So by definition, like with the sequential numbers are not good. The whole system needs to be set up in a way that it provides reliable results and reliable input for long term. So there are some various identification methods. Some are, well, better than the others. And also, well, there are some serve, of course, different purposes. But for the purposes of the recording, for the breeding program, so the earmarking with ear tags are the ones that we go for when we want to establish a recording in on a national level. So this comes, well, with of course, well, there are also different possibilities as well. For example, microchips implemented or injected below the skin or something like that, but also this needs readers and all kind of infrastructure that might not be in place in certain cases, or in most of the cases, I would say. So the ear tags are option to go for. Of course, the ear tags also in like a higher tech ear tags also can have microchip identifiers in them as well. So there is all kind of combinations. Anyway, the data recording formatting needs to be specified and agreed on, and then the people or the organization responsible for this should proceed with data collection. But this is not the only thing, but because if we have data and we don't do anything with it, of course, it's useless. So we need to ensure that this data is collected, processed, cleaned, and then used in a way that it serves to the benefit of the breed. Now, I mentioned that there are some strategies in terms of breeding approaches, and the crossbreeding is one of the, I would say, favored ones that is done in a lot of places. And here also for the crossbreeding strategies, there are a lot of variations and a lot of possibilities. There are some fairly straightforward ones. There are when we have two purebreds and we have an F1 generation or have a crossbred generation that we use a rear for meat production, and we do not use the crosses further. But also there are some possibilities when we use the crosses further on as the parents of the next generation. Well, and also I mentioned synthetics before, or we can choose various approaches and various strategies to upgrade our current population. Now, this is an approach that is very popular because it's relatively cheap and quite risk-free in terms of importing exotic genes into your population. So we have the exotic breed that you know that it would not survive in your conditions, but while you import a few males for this exotic breed and breed it to your females, then you have a crossbred, which hopefully have the properties of the native breed in terms of survival and some of the properties of the exotic breed for the production. In beef cattle, this approach works very well. In dairy cattle, less so. And then also there are the other breeds and species that have a mixed result. Mixed results meaning not so good. The largest problem when it comes to crossbreeding, however, that if you do not keep some of your population or your native population in a purebred form, so these purebred animals you can never get back from the crossbreds anymore. With an uncontrolled crossbreeding, you might run into a problem concerning the biological diversity. So we need to consider all these approaches and the benefits and the drawbacks of all these approaches to determine if the crossbreeding is a good approach for us and what type of crossbreeding we want to go for. So there is actually a quick graph or kind of a scheme for this, which is already quite old, but actually demonstrates a little bit what type of process or decision process needs to be considered. So just to arrive to the right place when it comes to the best approach for the which crossbreeding strategy should be used. So you see here, so there are various questions that need to be answered, and then we need to or can determine where our parental population should come from, or if this we should replace, or we should do a selection, or we should not do crossbreeding at all, and rather we should go with the selection with the local population. When it comes to breeding systems, we also have various opportunities, which method we want to choose to generate genetic gain. And so these ones are also more related to the crossbreeding strategies. So you might have heard about this so-called breeding pyramid when it comes to that a small number of animals which are of a high genetic value are giving rise to the majority of the population. So basically they are ensuring that the genetic value is, genetic level of the population is high. And then so we multiply them and then try to harvest this production potential. Now there are different levels for this, or different possibilities. Again, that is like a single tier structure when there is a progeny of male and female. From this, there is a selection of best males and females. They are bred again, and they give rise to the population, or the next generation for the population, which is again used then to select the best males and females. And it goes like in this type of circles. The two-tier or structure is that, so there is this nucleus, herds that are kind of providing or kind of having their own breeding program inside, which is concerned about the improvement of the animals. And these animals are then distributed to the other farmers who use them for their activities, basically also for breeding, but mostly then to produce animals that are used for their products. Another variation on this nucleus breeding system is shown here. So we have this breeding pyramid, this time with the 3 levels. So the top is the nucleus animals, or the best animals that are genetically superior to all. And these are then, well, in this case, this is in a sheep breeding program, but of course it could be any other species. So in this case, the males and females and go to the multiplier flocks, where they just make more of them, and then from these multiplier flocks, they move to the production flocks, where they basically serve as a production animals. So this is a so-called closed nucleus scheme, when all these 3 tiers are separate from each other, and the animals move just down, basically, that as shown on the picture. Now then there is also an open nucleus scheme, when the best ewes and rams, or the best males and females, have the opportunity to move up from the base flocks or the production flocks to multiplier, and from multiplier to nucleus, depending on, well, if they would be really good, then so there is a bit of a movement within these levels of the nucleus breeding programs as well. In terms of organization, there are some possibilities as well, when we can have one central nucleus. So this would be a farm that is located hopefully somewhere in the area, and then the breeding or the nuclear breeding is, and the genetic improvement is going on in this one farm, and then there is the animals are distributed to the other production flocks. It can also be a variation on this approach when there is not one central place, but each of the farms, or selected farms, have their production animals, but nearby they also have the nucleus herds, or these animals, breeding animals, that they are basically part of the central nucleus. So they are used in the breeding program as parents of the next generation. Well, there are certainly advantages to these nucleus schemes, that we have more control by breeding over the breeding decisions. So this breeding decision can be taken on a higher level. And we are quite sure that whatever we decide as the managers of the breeding program will also happen. The environmental conditions are usually comparable for the selection candidates, as I mentioned, because they are usually in the place where also the production herds are. So like, for example, the climatic conditions are similar. We need to be kind of sure or ensure that also the the overall conditions on feeding and everything else are also comparable to the field conditions. Now, it's often the case that actually these other product conditions for the production are not comparable in the nucleus herds and in the production herds. So that's why sometimes selecting the best animals from the nucleus herd or the best animals in the nucleus herd are not the best animals in the production. Also, well, we have an advantage actually in these nucleus schemes or nucleus herds, that we can record a lot of things, also many times more things that are actually possible to record in the field, which is actually advantageous from the research perspective. Because, well, we can look at the more, so look at the biological aspects of traits that would be really hard and challenging to measure in the field conditions. But since we have all the animals in one place, it's not a big problem to set up these measurement capacities. And also what we have are biotechnologies that are easier to use, again, because the animals are all in one place, and we can just do the insemination or the embryo transfer or the estrus synchronization, all these without huge logistical or organizational challenges. The nucleus breeding programs and the nucleus breeding farms also have their own problems, which make them problematic when it comes to genetic improvement on the local conditions or the conditions in the field. And this is also the reason many times such initiatives for the nuclear breeding programs are or failed in terms of low-income countries. And here are some of the points to consider. So the first one is about the choice of the animals. When we are basically not importing an exotic breed, so basically we want to have or want to gather the best animals for our core breeding program in the nucleus farm. So, well, we want to have the best animals from the farmers. But then, of course, there is a question if the farmers are prepared and committed to give their best animals, because, of course, this is also the source of their income. And then if somebody comes to you and say that, oh, well, giving me your best source of income, then, yeah, maybe you are hesitant to do so. Also, there is a question if the animals, so they are sold actually or just kind of rented out. So basically they are kept on the nucleus farm. And also then there is a question of what to buy and where to buy and all these things that might result into a situation that you do not have the best animals or the best animals that you could have in the herd. Also, the multiplier level has its other specific challenges with the connections with the farmers, and also when it comes to very small farmers with just a few animals, then these approaches might not be the best to use. Also, there is issues about optimization of the various steps in the process, and at the end, which is even more crucial that when we went through all of this and we believe that we have a very good animal that is improved and productive and genetically good and everything, but then when it comes to dissemination, and just farmers say no because they don't like it for some reason. As I mentioned before, the nucleus breeding schemes were tried and oftentimes failed in the conditions of the low-income countries. And that's why we need to look for other approaches how to achieve genetic gain and sustainable genetic gain in these conditions. And one of the approaches is that we use for that we use at our place at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, Vienna, and these are the community-based breeding programs. So what are the community-based breeding programs about? As for the background, so as I mentioned to you, many of the breeding programs were not successful in low-income countries because there were no active participation of the farmers. There were these central nucleus herds and stations that distributed the genetic material to the farmers, but then again, the farmers were not taken into consideration, so the material and the basically genetic material that was being developed was not fitting very much the requirements and requests of the farmers. Why do we like community-based breeding programs so much? So they are creative and productive ways to incorporate the community into the breeding process itself. It accomplishes socially valuable actions, and also it makes it easy or makes it, if not easy, but makes it possible to express for the farmers to express themselves. So what they want and what the ideal animal for them would look like. And based on that, we could shape and incorporate everything into the breeding program. And then when everybody is properly informed and empowered and then feels like the part of the breeding program, then these breeding programs also works very well in terms of the societal impact. So what are the characteristics of such a community-based breeding program, or CBBP? So these are in a way different and or exactly the opposite of the centralized system. So these are decentralized when it comes to localization of the animals. So the all the herds of the participating farmers are actually part of it. So they are not kept in one place, but back at their communities. And the farmers are not just the customers of the program, but they are really part of it, starting from day one when the breeding objectives needs to be defined, continuing on with at the later stages of the program as well. So the ownership, we could say, of the program is essentially with the farmers. Here are a few pictures from CBBPs from Ethiopia, and this was a sheep CBBP, and this is one of the great successes of that also that we had, and also that what we have shown how the CBBPs could work on the ground. And actually, this sheep breeding program in Ethiopia also got nationally recognized, and now it's put up as a way to go, or basically a suggested strategy for the sheep breeding in these regions. But back at the beginning, well, quite a few years back, there was a project that was dealing with sheep in these 4 areas. So there are also a few other pictures from the area so that you can have an impression how the environment looks like. You see plenty of grass and places that is good for the sheep to basically graze on, and basically to a pretty good environment for sheep breeding. But as it happens, the local breed were not very good in terms of production. So that's where we came in and tried to improve the situation. The research process was the same as usually in the CBBP systems, or establishment of a CBBP. That is description of the production system, then trying to define the breeding objectives, define the breeding strategies, set up a recording scheme, estimate breeding values, and proceed with the selection. And when we arrive to the selection, then we have the animals that are the best from the current generation, and then these animals were used as the parents of the next generation. And then we go again with the recording of the production, and again a next selection step. So this is more or less how the production system looks like, or what we should look at. The top half of the picture is describing the natural resources, so the climate and the general environment, the animals, and the challenges that the animals face from the biological perspective, in this case, the parasites. And the bottom half of the picture is about socio-economic resources, that is the market, the institutions, infrastructural, and socio-cultural factors, as is listed in the graphs. When it comes to definition of the breeding objectives, this is a more interesting point to look at, because, well, we need to decide which traits will be followed. In the European setting, this is more straightforward, because I mentioned the high-level decision bodies that come together, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings, and decide what is the list of traits. But in this case, what we need to do is to find the traits that the farmers like, so that the resulting products of the selection at the end will also match their expectations. So the question is, which traits we need to improve? And for this, we have several tools that we can use. And these are personal interviews and workshops that basically people from here, or basically our PhD students, were going there and conducting these interviews and trying to find out what are the preferences of the farmers. Then there is also choice experiments. I will show you in the next slide what these are about. And then also there is a ranking of live animals, so somehow to get an impression what is the importance, what is important for the farmers on the spot. So the choice experiments were done mostly by the so-called choice cards. So here you see 2 choice cards on the screen. So these are basically like descriptions of 2 animals. So basically in each choice card you see on the left and right column, so numbered animal 1 and animal 2, and these are done with some characteristics of these animals are drawn there with the picture. It's a drawing, because some of the farmers might be illiterate, and basically there are lots of these cards, and in each of these cards there are 2 rams, or 2 animals with certain characteristics, and the farmer is asked which one would he or she take as the animal of choice. On the left card, for example, there is animal 1 and 2. Both of them are rams. One is black and the other one is reddish brown. Both of them have fat tails. One is with the horn, and then other one is without a horn. And both of them have a good libido. So basically this is just to have that. So there is a mating. So it's kind of can be relied on when it comes to mating. And you see that some of these some of these factors are the same, but some are different. So the farmer says either 1 or 2. And then there is another card which might have, for example, all the characteristics, but one have a big fat tail and the other one has a smaller tail. And then it comes to this also kind of incorporated into the decision. And then these cards and the symbols of these cards are interchangeable. And if we do a lot of variations of these hypothetical animals, then we can have a good idea what the farmer's preferences is. For example, also on the second card, 1 and 2, so these are the ewes, which all of them have, I mean, they keep, well, very fertile, but one of them cares about the young and the other one doesn't. So it's like maternal instincts. One of them is strong maternal instinct, other one is not so. First one is like easy birth, but I mean, the other one is not so easy birth. White and the colors, white and black. And basically the tails are, one of them has a big fat tail and the other one is a normal tail. I mean, yeah, so I mentioned these tails because these were the fat tail sheep. So that this was also one of the traits that, of course, is relevant in this particular breed. So again, if we vary a lot of choice cards with the ewes, and then we can see what are the preferences with the certain traits that are mentioned on the choice cards, and these preferences and aversions towards or against certain traits are giving us the idea what to go for when it comes to a breeding program and the breeding goal definition. So this is just a picture how these choice experiments were conducted. So again, it's a meeting of a researcher with a local farmer, or basically the participant of the CBBP program. At the end of the year, there are also rankings of live animals. So the farmers putting the animals in one place, and either phenotypically or later on when it comes, when the breeding values are already done already, then also according to the breeding values, the animals are put into categories. But at the very beginning, so there is a place and time when the farmers are asked which one are, for example, so there could be a different setup for the questions, but it could be that which are the 3 best and the 3 worst animals from his herd, and asking what was the reason for the choice. And the reasons for the choice were also telling something about the farmer's preferences towards or against the certain traits. So this could be done also on the house or nearby, actually where the animals are located. Really important part is, of course, the data collection and data entry and analysis that needs to be done. This is done usually on the researcher level. So as I mentioned, so we had over the time PhD students within this project. So, and this work was also part of their PhD work. So this is done by them, and then a feedback is provided to the farmers. After that, of course, when we have the project end at some point and the PhD students finish, and after that, there should be an organization or some kind of a local structure that should take these responsibilities over. So with the data collection, entry, analysis, and feedback, so the program runs for a longer time and not just until the project is finished. So this is a really, really crucial step that needs to be thought about already during the program. And then that is also why it's the reason where there should be defined who is responsible for what part of the program and who is doing these actions. The next few slides are on another important step that I was mentioning to you, and that is the unique identification. These could be of various forms. The first one is this on the ears of the llama. So this is one of the early CBBPs that were implemented in South America. But then the second picture is the more usual one, the ear tags that have a number on them. So with these ear tags, we have a way to identify the animals in a unique way. Also, it could be, well, the ear tags as in the left picture, but also it can be also on the other parts of the animal as indicated in the picture on the right. As I mentioned, the processing of the results was or is done in an environment or by the researchers. In this case, it was done at the Boku as part of these PhD projects, and a certain ranking based on the breeding values was established. So this is what is meant here by this scientific ranking. Groups were formed based on the breeding values, so the animals with the best, medium, and not so good breeding values were kind of grouped together, and this was communicated back to the farmers, so that what is the actual scientific ranking for their animals. But then the actual decision of which animals to use as the parents of the next generation was established during the selection events. So the selection events were again events on the ground where the researchers and also the farmers participated together. And also the timing for these events is really important because, of course, we want to ensure that we have, well, reliable information about the animals, but also that the animals are still existing, so they were not slaughtered or sold by the farmers. Because, of course, this can also easily happen, because also we have to remember that these animals are kept as production animals for production and not as breeding animals. So we need to ensure that really what we wanted to keep as a breeding animal. So we'll just process the results fairly quickly and then go back to the ground and have a selection meeting where the animals, these breeding animals, could be identified. So also here are a few more pictures about such events. So again, these are our PhD students or former PhD students now. Both of them successfully finished quite some time ago. But anyway, so these selection events were basically starting with the explanation what was done and the justifications for how the animals were ranked, and then this was followed up by the actual selection event. The selection events were, at least in Ethiopian perspective, were 3 times a year before Christmas, Easter, and New Year. And so this is also kind of visualizes or kind of underlines the necessity also not just to have a knowledge about the genetics material and the genetic background of the animals, but also the local calendar, because while there is not too much time in the European perspective, there is not too much time between Christmas and the New Year. In the Ethiopian calendar, the New Year is in September. So this is what needs to be taken into consideration. Also, we need to take into consideration that these celebrations or holidays are also the time when quite a number of animals are sold or slaughtered, because, well, there is an increased demand for the celebrations. So that's why we need to do or held selection events before these holidays. So whatever is selected as the parent of the next generation, that should be kept safe and not sold and not slaughtered, so that it can actually utilize its genetic background and it can actually pass on this its genetics to the next generation. Also, in connection to these holidays, the thing is that when the people sell their animals, they usually sell the biggest ones or the largest ones because they fetch the most money. But at the same time, these are the animals that grow the fastest. Therefore, probably they are also the ones that have the highest breeding values. So when selling them, so if the people sell them for these holidays, then we are actually losing our best candidates for the selection. So therefore, the timing of the selections events is extremely important. So usually what is then being done, as I mentioned, that there are 3 categories, good, medium, and bad. And then there is a farmers committee who actually makes the final choice. So at the end, although the researchers set up a list and it's usually quite clear which animals should be selected, still the final choice is with the farmers, and they are told that these animals are the best, these are medium, and these are the worst, but they are still allowed to choose any. So at the end, basically, they make an informed decision, and usually what happens, they choose from the best or the best category of animals, and sometimes from the medium. So with this approach, what we ensure quite consistently that we get rid of the bad animals, therefore the average of the population goes up. So again, a few pictures from such a selection, meetings and events. Also here the animals and the selection candidates are gathered, and then, well, some of the people around here are the members of the committee who are then making their choice based on the list and the materials that they got. Also, this is an opportunity again to weigh the animals and provide or gather some data. This one is also checking on the teeth, so that is the age of the animal is being checked on, and also, well, there is a various other activities could be done. So as you see, it's a kind of a social activity as well. So people are, well, these are also owners of the animals, but also the participants in this CBBP program. This part is kind of shows how are the animals kind of put to these groups. So they are not just grouped on the paper, but at the end, so they are also put into a separate enclosures. So the committee has a bit of a easier time to kind of finding the animals or judging the animals, and then pointing out the ones that they are actually interested in the most. At the selection events, or towards the end of the selection events, also there were animal shows organized, where the main purpose of these animal shows were to raise awareness that the animals that are selected for breeding are the best ones, and that they are the more valuable than just any other animal that they use for slaughter or sale, because the offspring of these animals will likely produce more than the average animal that they have right now. So it's kind of worthwhile to keep. In these animal shows, also the animals were awarded with the rosettes that you see on the bottom picture, which was of course also an event, and everybody was quite happy, especially if their animal won the prize. Also, along the animals, the farmers were awarded for the good management and record keeping and good breeding of the animals. So with the kind of small prizes that were also useful for them for the future. Also here you see pictures from these awarding ceremonies with very nice animals with rosettes and very happy farmers. The next stage of the CBBP is slightly more complex, and that is was implemented actually in this one. What is shown here was implemented in Ethiopia and worked pretty well. So basically what happened is that the project itself was buying the selected rams and creating a revolving fund in this way. So actually the project was buying them, but the animals actually never left Ethiopia, but they were kind of left in place. But this ensured also that the animals were not sold for other purpose or were not slaughtered. Now, when these animals got old, then these old breeding rams were then fattened and sold at the end, and the money went to the community account. And so in these communities also some sort of breeding organizations were created. So the formalization of the breeding, it was also done this way. This is particularly important because for the ram sharing and exchange, what was also implemented and actually necessary so that the genetic diversity is kept in check, some kind of bureaucracy is necessary. So we need to know what animal goes where, and then somebody needs to decide this. So there should be some kind of an association that overwatches this process. And in this case, in the Ethiopian case, there were farmers, members of this association, and we're basically managing this after the project has ended. It's also important not to outsource this too much. This is bureaucracy or this kind of decision making too much, because then the farmers again feel, and they would be in fact disconnected from the program, which on the medium and long term also leads to its decline. So with this approach, we also ensured that the farmers are also the actual owners of the breeding program. Some general issues with the setting up the CBBPs, and the first one is the site selection, where we have to consider if the breeding is the right intervention at all to go for in order to improve the livelihoods of the farmers, because the livestock might not be important at all, and therefore we would just basically waste our time and resources with trying to set up something that not work anyway. Also, there should be a local interest. This is meant by the third bullet point of technical and intellectual backup on a local scale, because again, at the end, what we want, or actually from the beginning, we want to involve the farmers, but at the end, we want them and maybe some local organizations to take over. So if this could not be ensured, again, we are wasting our resources, because it have been shown quite a few times that projects going in somewhere do not yield sustainable results when it comes to keeping the systems set up during the project, so keeping them after the project has ended and the project participants have left. The second issue to consider are the recording schemes. So these should be simple, cost-effective, and time-saving. Information has to be with the farmers on time. So basically, we need to ensure that by the time of the selection event, everything is computed and everything is assessed, that we can provide them with the information which are the animals, which animals are the best to choose from. Another aspect of the CBBPs that should be considered are the communication processes that are often neglected by the projects, especially when it comes to breeding, because we are kind of used to go in, get the data, do the computations, provide the results, and that was the the end of it, but in this case, it's not the case. So the scientists should be more like facilitators and moderators of the project. Well, it is essential to build trust and allocate enough time for the discussions and feedback loops. There could be also language barriers with what we often face. So there is local institutions and the role of the local institutions. So people who have the overview in the specific geographic area is very necessary. Also, people who understand and can translate with the local languages is absolutely essential, because as I mentioned, the key to the CBBP is communications with the local farmers. There needs to be a commitment also from the local team and the local farmers, so that it's when it comes to the decisions and when it comes to the ranking, then they also open to changes and open to modifications of the processes that they have done before. So this oftentimes, well, it's not easy. So it needs to have also this aspect in place. And then also when it comes to the research teams, we are not talking about just involvements of geneticists or statisticians or bioinformaticians or people who deal with data, but also scientists who deal with the people. Also, I mentioned the cooperations with other institutions, so all the agencies, NGOs, also governmental organizations which are in the region are interesting and important partners for the CBBP. So this also needs to be considered, of course, and then being involved whenever is necessary in the project. And some of them should be involved from the beginning, as I mentioned. It's because at the end of the project we want to have also some local support, and of course it's much easier to have local support with somebody who was involved in the whole duration of the project than at the end of the project just kind of try to put this on somebody's shoulders and hope that they would do it from now on. This point, or these points with the institutions, is also connected with the other, with the general environment when it comes to legal frameworks and other initiatives, and kind of incorporation of the CBBPs to the other initiatives that are in the region. As for the short conclusions for this part on the CBBPs, so these community-based breeding programs are very good ones for planning a genetic improvement, which is the balance of genetic gain, but also, or improvement of the genetic gain, but also considering local knowledge and local aspects and the wishes of the farmers, which ensures that the project is taken up and kept for a long time. If there are some practical problems, then the solutions could be often found with the collaboration with the local farmers and kind of relying also on their knowledge. So this sums up my presentation on the breeding programs in low-income countries. This presentation did not mention genomic data at all, but of course it doesn't mean that it's not possible to implement in this context. In fact, we work quite a bit with genomic data also in relation to breeding programs in low-income countries and various other populations in the context of population diversity or inbreeding or admixture results or various kind of crossbreeding, heterosis, and others.